The afternoon sunlight spilled a soft glow over Washington, D.C. Caroline Leavitt, 27 years old and the youngest White House press secretary ever, was chilling in her fancy apartment close to the White House. A tiny silver cross pinned to her navy blue blazer, a little nod to her faith from New Hampshire, caught the light as she got up. Out of nowhere, her phone buzzed. It was President Trump calling. "Caroline, there's a faith-related case down at the D.C. local court. Some Christians are pushing back because they got blocked from praying in public. Head over there now, check it out, and let me know what's up," he said, his tone sharp and leaving no room for hesitation. Caroline's neat apartment screamed discipline. Papers stacked just right, business clothes laid out ahead of time. Today she went for a low-key look, blazer, white shirt, black pants, but she still rocked that cross like always. As Trump's go-to voice, she was no stranger to juggling messes, but this hit different. It tied straight into her own beliefs. She hopped into her slick black SUV, weaving through D.C.'s packed streets. NPR was blasting the news, but she switched it off to zero in on the job ahead. Caroline pushed through the glass doors of the D.C. local court, stepping into a hot, buzzing mess of a room. The crowd's chatter hummed like a wonky tune, people waiting on small-time stuff like traffic tickets or contract spats, mixed with the steady click-clack of keyboards from the clerk's corner. She checked her watch. 2:53 p.m., just a few minutes until the faith case Trump wanted her to watch kicked off. She grabbed a stiff wooden chair in the middle row, plopped down her bag, and pulled out her phone to jot notes. That silver cross around her neck shimmered under the harsh lights, though she didn't catch the stares starting to lock onto her. The courtroom wasn't big, but the clutter made it feel heavy. A middle-aged guy in an "I Am King" t-shirt sat a few seats over, messing with his phone. To her right, a young woman with a necklace so shiny it could double as a spotlight was mumbling to her lawyer. Caroline raised an eyebrow. Clearly, no one cared about a dress code here. She shook it off and got to work, noting details about the Christian group suing over a ban on public prayer in a nearby park. This was a hot topic Trump wanted to spin for his base, and she was his eyes on the ground. The wooden door behind the judge's bench creaked open, and Judge Charles Hargrove stepped in. At 62, he had a stiff vibe, salt and pepper hair slicked back, wire-rimmed glasses sliding down his nose, and a black robe so crisp it looked fresh off the iron. The room went quiet as he took his seat, his sharp eyes sweeping over everyone. "All rise," James Wilson, a tall black bailiff with a no-nonsense look, called out. Caroline stood with the rest, phone still in hand, sizing up Hargrove. He slammed his gavel down, kicking things off. "This is a court of law, not a stage for your quirks," he snapped, his voice deep and biting. Hargrove ran through cases like clockwork. A guy got hit with a $50 fine for parking wrong. No pushback. A woman late on rent got a slap on the wrist. Caroline scribbled notes, picking up on how Hargrove kept things tight and chilly, like a robot. She glanced at the "I Am King" guy. He stood up for some neighbor issue, and Hargrove didn't blink at his loud shirt. The necklace lady went next, and still no comment on her bling. Caroline frowned. Something felt weird. Then Hargrove's eyes locked on her. He froze mid-sentence, flipping papers, his gaze narrowing behind those glasses like he'd clocked something. "Miss Leavitt," he said, his tone cold but shaky, clearly recognizing her from White House briefings. Caroline looked up, unfazed, standing steady. The crowd shifted, whispers picking up as a few others caught on too. "That cross," Hargrove pointed at her neck, his voice hard, "doesn't fit here. This courtroom's neutral, not a place to flash your beliefs." Caroline scanned the walls, no signs banning anything like it. "I'm Caroline Leavitt, White House press secretary, here to observe a case for work," she said, clear and calm. "This is personal, covered by the First Amendment. I'm not breaking any rules." Hargrove's eyes tightened, his face stiffening. "This isn't the spot to wear that and stir things up. Court's neutral, not a chapel." He smacked his gavel again, doubling down. James Wilson, the bailiff, leaned in from the bench, watching. Mrs. Thompson, the middle-aged clerk with her hair in a tight bun, paused her typing, peeking at Caroline with interest. The t-shirt guy and necklace lady swapped hushed words, thrown that Hargrove zeroed in on her but not them. Caroline stood firm, gripping her phone, already piecing it together. Hargrove wasn't just coming for her. He had it out for that cross, like it personally offended him. "Sir, I've got every right to wear this under the First Amendment," Caroline said, keeping her tone cool but solid. Hargrove shut her down fast. "Don't try schooling me on the law. Get up to the bench now." The room went dead quiet, everyone holding their breath. Caroline took a slow inhale, then stepped up to the defendant's stand, her heels tapping lightly on the creaky wooden floor of the D.C. local court. All eyes were glued to her. That silver cross on her navy blazer collar flickered under the lights, like a tiny spark before a big storm. Judge Charles Hargrove loomed up there, his eyes narrowing behind those wire-rimmed glasses, his face turning red with irritation. "So, what's your deal, showing up here with that thing, Miss Leavitt?" he asked, his voice quiet but slicing like a blade, trying to keep his cool authority intact. "Sir, I'm here doing my job, and I've got the right to wear it," she shot back, still holding her phone, her thumb quietly flipping on the record button. Hargrove slammed his gavel down, the bang bouncing off the walls. "I've dealt with plenty of folks like you, thinking faith lets them mess with anything. This is my courtroom, and I say it's not okay." He leaned in, clutching that gavel like a lifeline. "You realize this could be contempt of court, right?" Caroline's brow creased as she flicked her eyes around. The guy in the I Am King t-shirt was just sitting there, unnoticed. The woman with the giant necklace was muttering to her lawyer, ignored. Yet her little cross was the big issue. "Sir, I'm not causing any trouble," she said, voice still steady. "I'm here for work. My outfit's not bothering anybody. If there's a rule against it, I'd like to see it written down." Hargrove smirked, a dry, empty grin. "A rule? I'm the rule here. You walked in with that, disrespecting this place, and now you're asking for paperwork?" He hit the gavel again, so hard Mrs. Thompson, the clerk, stopped typing and looked up, worried. The crowd started buzzing. An older guy in the back shook his head, whispering to the person next to him, "That necklace over there's way flashier. Why's no one calling it out?" James Wilson, the tall black bailiff, stood by the bench, head tilted, watching. He'd been here 15 years, and Hargrove zeroing in on Caroline felt like déjà vu. He'd seen this slant before. Caroline took a breath, knowing arguing straight up wouldn't budge Hargrove. She played it smart. "Sir, if I've crossed a line, I deserve a clear reason why," she said, adjusting her phone just enough to keep the recording rolling. Hargrove sneered, taking her words like a dare. "Reason? Here's your reason. I'm fining you $500 for contempt." He smashed the gavel a third time, the sound landing like a done deal. The crowd gasped. Mrs. Thompson glanced up, fingers hovering over her keyboard, unease in her eyes. $500? A young woman whispered to her buddy. "Just for a cross?" The I Am King guy let out a quick laugh but zipped it when Hargrove shot him a look. "You'll pay up today before you leave," Hargrove went on, sounding like a teacher scolding a kid. "Maybe this'll teach you to respect the rules. This isn't a church, Miss Leavitt, or your personal spotlight." He leaned back, smug, like he'd just won a one-sided argument. Caroline didn't flinch, her sharp eyes locked on Hargrove. "Sir, I get your call," she said, voice even but firm with purpose. "But why aren't the others here with loud shirts or big jewelry getting fined too?" Hargrove's face went redder, his hand squeezing the gavel till his knuckles turned white. "Don't dodge the point," he barked. "You're the only one gutsy enough to bring a religious thing in here. That's what sets you apart." Caroline gave a small nod like she'd just figured something out. She didn't say more, but her head was clear. Hargrove wasn't just picky. He was gunning for Christian faith on purpose. Mrs. Thompson started typing again, but her fingers shook. In her 12 years with Hargrove, she'd hardly seen him slap a fine this big over something so small. James Wilson stood by the bench, arms crossed, his glance at Caroline carrying a touch of understanding. He'd seen Hargrove run hundreds of cases, and this focus on her stood out. The crowd's whispers got louder, some sneaking out phones despite the no recording sign. Caroline stayed put, phone in hand, her mind spinning. This wasn't just a fine, it was a shot at something bigger. "You finished, sir?" she asked, voice quiet but piercing. Hargrove frowned, thrown off by how calm she was. "Not yet," he snapped. "You'll pay and I'll get on with the day. Sit down." Caroline didn't sit. She stepped closer to the bench, resting a hand on its edge, eyes never leaving Hargrove. "I'll pay, but this isn't over," she said, low but loaded with grit. Hargrove smirked again, but it wobbled this time. Karoline Leavitt stood tall at the defendant's stand, staring down Judge Charles Hargrove, that silver cross still shining. That silver cross on her navy blazer collar glowed like a quiet dare. Hargrove had just slapped her with a $500 fine for contempt, his face glowing red with satisfaction, hands still locked around the gavel. The crowd in the D.C. local court froze, whispers dying out. Mrs. Thompson, the clerk, stopped typing, her nervous eyes bouncing between Caroline and Hargrove. James Wilson, the tall black bailiff, stood with arms crossed, head tilted like he knew something big was brewing. Hargrove cut through the silence. "Did you catch that, Miss Leavitt? $500 due today. Sit down. We've got other stuff to handle." He smacked the gavel, acting like it was over, but Karoline didn't move. She took a slow breath, rested her hand on the bench's edge, and spoke, clear, calm, and sharp. "Sir, before I sit, I need to clear up a couple things for the record." Hargrove's face scrunched up, thrown off by how steady she was. "The record? You don't get to call shots here," he snapped, but his voice shook, like he sensed trouble coming. Karoline flashed a small smile, not cocky, just sure of herself. She pulled a shiny gold card from her bag and held it up for everyone to see. "I'm Karoline Leavitt, White House press secretary, working under President Donald Trump. But here's what you don't know, Judge Hargrove. I don't just talk pretty. I know the law better than you might guess." The crowd let out a collective gasp. The "I Am King" t-shirt guy's jaw dropped. The woman with the oversized necklace leaned over to her lawyer, whispering. Hargrove froze, gavel hovering, caught off guard. "That doesn't mean you didn't break my rules," he mumbled, voice fading. Karoline didn't let him bounce back. She stepped closer to the podium, her voice carrying across the room. "Your rules or your personal gripes? I'm here on the president's orders to watch a faith-related case. Christians fighting for their right to pray in public. This cross," she pointed to her neck, "is my freedom, backed by the First Amendment. You fine me for it, but do you even know what the law says?" Hargrove's face tightened, pushing back. "I don't need you telling me the law. This is my courtroom. I call the shots." Karoline didn't back down, her tone stronger. "You're off, sir. The law isn't just yours. Ever hear of Church of Lukumi Babalu I vs. City of Hialeah 1993? Supreme Court said banning religious symbols without a good reason breaks the Constitution. Got a solid reason, or just don't like it?" The room went pin-drop quiet, a few folks sneaking phone pics despite the rules. Hargrove's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Mrs. Thompson held her breath, fingers floating over the keys. James Wilson gave a tiny nod, eyes bright. He'd seen tons of cases, but never someone turn it around this quick. Karoline kept going, her voice smooth like she'd practiced it. "You hit me with a $500 fine for contempt, but I've got proof right here. That guy," she pointed at the "I Am King" t-shirt wearer, "has a loud shirt that's clearly off dress code, and you didn't blink. Her," she nodded at the necklace woman, "she's got bling that stands out, and you're cool with it. But my cross, a Christian symbol, that's what bugs you? That's not law, sir, that's you picking sides." Hargrove shook, his face flipping from red to pale. You're trashing my name," he stuttered, sounding weak. Karoline didn't let up. She lifted her phone. "I've recorded all this since you called me up. I've also shot a text to the White House office about this mess. Fine me if you want, but this isn't done." The crowd buzzed loud. Someone yelled, "She's right!" Another clapped, quickly shushed by James Wilson. Hargrove scrambled. "Miss Leavitt, I can drop the fine. No need to blow this up." He tapped the gavel weakly, voice shaky, but Karoline shook her head, eyes locked on him. "No, sir, pulling it back just because of who I am proves you're even more off. The problem's not me, it's how you run this place. I'm asking you to check the last 6 months of records, all fines tied to religious symbols, and I'm suggesting First Amendment training for everyone here, including you." The courtroom went wild. An older guy in the back jumped up, clapping, shouting, "That's it!" A woman whispered, "Who is she? She's awesome." Mrs. Thompson typed like crazy, eyes shining like she was catching history live. James Wilson cracked a small smile. He'd pegged her as different from the jump. Grove sank into his chair, face gray, hands shaky on the gavel. He looked at Karoline, really seeing her now, not just some defendant, but a real challenge. "You think I'm just a mouthpiece," Karoline said, voice quiet but strong. "I've been with President Trump through tons of legal fights, elections, policies. I learned law to back him up, and now I'm using it for me and others. You messed up big, Judge Hargrove." She set her White House card on the bench and stepped back, eyes never leaving him. Hargrove's mouth moved, but no sound came out. He'd tangled with someone not just sharp, but a legal pro. The crowd broke into scattered cheers. Mrs. Thompson's fingers flew, locking the moment down. James Wilson edged closer to the bench, respect clear in his eyes for Karoline. Hargrove sat there, his control slipping away in front of everyone. Karoline stood steady, that silver cross still gleaming, not just faith anymore, but her badge of triumph. Karoline Leavitt walked out of the D.C. local court, the late afternoon sun bouncing off the silver cross on her navy blazer collar. It was 3:30 p.m., but inside, things had just blown up big time. She stopped at the glass doors, glancing at her phone. The recording was already sent to the White House office, along with a quick note to Trump's advisor. "Hargrove fined me for the cross. Dealt with it. What's next?" She knew this wasn't just about her anymore. It was a golden opportunity for Trump and his crew to make a splash. Back in the courtroom, the crowd was still humming. An older guy in the back turned to his buddy, voice shaky. "I've never seen anyone take down a judge that quick." A young woman with her boyfriend muttered, "She's the White House press secretary. Unreal." Mrs. Thompson, the clerk, was rushing to print the session's notes, her hands jittery from what she'd just seen. James Wilson, the tall black bailiff, slipped out of the courtroom, phone in hand, dialing a coworker. "Man, you won't believe this. A young woman just shut Hargrove up cold." Word was spreading fast, like a spark hitting dry grass. Karoline hadn't even made it to her car when her phone started going nuts. A notification from X popped up. Crossing Court was trending. She tapped the app and saw a tweet from someone inside. "Judge fines White House press secretary $500 for a cross." She claps back with the law, leaves him speechless. Crossing Court. In 10 minutes, comments flooded in. "Who's this chick? Crazy." A big conservative account chimed in. "Proof the system's out to get Christians. Thank you, Karoline Leavitt." She cracked a little smile. This was just the start. By 4 p.m., President Trump jumped on it, posting from his account. "Karoline Leavitt, my awesome spokesperson, just gave a biased judge a lesson in religious freedom. Legal rock star. We won't let them stomp on faith." The tweet racked up 50,000 retweets in half an hour. Outlets like Fox News ate it up, blasting headlines. "White House press secretary stands up to judge over cross and wins big." Karoline's phone rang. Trump's senior advisor. "You killed it," he said, voice buzzing. "The boss wants this loud. Get a statement ready." Meanwhile, Charles Hargrove sat alone in his dim office behind the bench, shadows creeping over his pale face. His phone wouldn't quit. D.C. Judicial Council, reporters, old buddies. He muted it, hands shaky around a cold coffee mug. Clashing with Karoline didn't just embarrass him in front of everyone. It was blowing up across town. "She's just some young thing," he grumbled. "How'd this happen?" But he knew he'd run into something way bigger than him. Mrs. Thompson, still at the courthouse, couldn't hold it in. She called a friend at a local paper, keeping her voice hushed but steady. "I've been with Hargrove 12 years. He's always had it out for religious stuff, especially Christian symbols. That girl today was spot on. I've got proof." She slid a small notebook from her drawer, packed with notes on cases. Folks hit hard with fines for crosses, warned over Islamic pins, while loud teas and shiny jewelry got a free pass. She knew she was sticking her neck out, but after today, staying quiet wasn't happening. James Wilson moved too, meeting coworkers in the courthouse break room, voice thick with feeling. "I've seen Hargrove fine people for religious stuff at least 20 times this year. Rude shirts?" He just laughs. "She called out what we've all noticed but never said." A coworker nodded. "I'm tipping off the press. This needs to be out there." By 5 p.m., a Channel 7 reporter was outside the courthouse, filming live. Today, White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt got fined $500 for wearing a cross in court. She pushed back, and now the city's lit up. On X, Crossing Court's passed 100,000 mentions. People were chiming in with their own Hargrove run-ins. "He fined me $200 for a prayer badge last year. I watched him chew out a mom over a cross in a divorce case." A big account dropped a short video. Someone snuck it in court, Karoline flashing her White House card, voice cutting through strong. It went viral, hitting 1 million views fast. Karoline sat in her car on a quiet street corner watching the chaos unfold. She called her husband, a chill businessman. "Honey, I just took down a judge. This is gonna blow up," she said, calm but hyped. He chuckled. "You always pull off wild stuff. Be careful." She nodded, hung up, and opened an email from Trump's team. "Prep for a press conference tonight. We're making this a win." At home, Hargrove flipped on the TV, catching his face on the evening news. "Judge faces heat after fining press secretary." The bold headline glared. He shut it off, hands trembling. The Judicial Council had called, wanting answers by morning. He knew his 30-year career was on the ropes, all because of a 27-year-old and her little cross. The next morning, the D.C. Judicial Council's office was buzzing like crazy. Karoline Leavitt versus Judge Charles Hargrove had swept through D.C., pushing the council to kick off a rush investigation. Linda Martinez, a pro-investigator with 20 years under her belt, stood at a long table, laying out stacks of Hargrove's case files. Her team had been at it since 6 a.m., sparked by an official complaint from the White House office. Karoline had kicked this off last night, and now Linda Martinez was telling her team, voice steady, "We've got 48 hours to dig up everything on Hargrove and religious symbols." Meanwhile, Karoline was in her White House office, gearing up for a press conference Trump had ordered that night. She listened to the courtroom recording again, firing off an email to his advisor. "X is loaded with people calling out Hargrove's bias. Let's hit this hard." Her phone wouldn't quit. Texts from lawyers, reporters, supporters. A law student messaged, "You're my hero. Hargrove fined my mom for a cross once." Karoline grinned. This wasn't just her battle anymore. It was touching thousands. At the courthouse, Mrs. Thompson stepped into the investigation room, gripping her little notebook. "I've tracked Hargrove for 12 years, she told Linda, voice wobbly but firm. "He's always gone after religious symbols, crosses, hijabs, anything that pops. But loud shirts or big jewelry, he lets it go." Linda skimmed the notebook, spotting case after case. September 14th, 2024, guy with a cross fined $300 for disruption. October 20th, 2024, Muslim woman with a hijab fined $200 for inappropriateness. Linda's brow creased. "This is huge, thanks." James Wilson showed up too, handing over a scribbled statement. "I've been a bailiff there 15 years, he said. "Hargrove's fined folks with religious symbols 3 times more than other stuff. One day I saw him nail 5 people for crosses but brush off 3 in rude shirts." Linda scribbled fast, her team matching it with official records. The numbers piled up. Over the past year, 70% of religious symbol fines hit Christians, averaging $150, $200, double what other dress code issues got. Charles Hargrove, holed up in his home office, faced the council on Zoom. "I didn't mean to play favorites," he said, voice shaky, hands cupping his head. Linda laid out the facts. "Mr. Hargrove, your records show you penalize crosses 80% harsher than similar slip-ups. How do you explain that?" He went quiet, eyes dropping. Karoline's calm, razor-sharp voice about the First Amendment echoed in his head. "I didn't see it," he muttered. "I thought I was keeping things in line." By noon, Linda's first report was done. "It's not just Hargrove," she told the council. "We found 3 other D.C. judges with similar habits, milder but there. Hargrove's the standout, clear bias, especially against Christians." The council hit him with an immediate suspension, waiting for a final call. Word got out, and X lit up again. #cross in court. Hargrove suspended. Karoline Leavitt rocks the system. A conservative account posted, "Trump's legal star scores another one." At 6 p.m., Karoline stood in the White House briefing room, fixing her blazer in the mirror, that silver cross still shining. Trump strolled in, clapping her shoulder. "You made me proud, Karoline. Tonight we prove religious freedom's off limits." She nodded, stepped to the podium, cameras flashing like crazy. "Yesterday, I got fined for this cross. Not because I messed up, but because a judge thought he was bigger than the law," she said, voice carrying strong. "I pushed back, not just for me, but for everyone who's been treated wrong for their beliefs." The press room hummed, questions flying, but she handled them coolly, tossing out law facts and X stats. Hargrove watched the briefing on TV, hands shaking. He switched it off, sitting in the dark. His phone was a mess. Colleagues bailing, reporters circling. What hit him hardest was Thompson and Wilson speaking up, people he'd trusted. He opened his laptop, pulling up the Church of Lukumi Babalu Ayi, ruling Karoline had name-dropped. Reading it, he sighed. "She's right. I screwed up." For the first time in 30 years, Hargrove felt tiny. He called the council, voice rough. "I'm stepping down, but I want to help fix this." The next day, he showed up at a small council meeting. No robe, just himself. "I didn't catch my own slant," he said, eyes red. "Karoline Leavitt woke me up. I'll join the training so no one else messes up like I did." Linda nodded. Hargrove flipping like this could be a win. News spread, stirring talk. Some on X laughed it off. "Hargrove's just pretending," but others backed him. "At least he owns it. Rare." Karoline, back in her office, got an email from Linda. "Hargrove quit, signed up to train. You turned him around." She glanced at the cross in the mirror, smiling. The case she'd gone to watch, Christians suing over public prayer, was now a small piece of a way bigger deal. She'd turned a random day into a game changer, not just for Hargrove, but the whole setup. 4 days after the D.C. local court clash, D.C.'s vibe had shifted hard. Karoline stood in her White House office, staring out at Pennsylvania Avenue, that silver cross on her navy blazer collar glowing, now a sign of something massive. Her phone buzzed with thanks from Trump, conservatives, and regular folks. An email from the D.C. Judicial Council popped in. "New rules. Thanks, Miss Leavitt." She smiled. This win wasn't just hers. After the lightning-fast probe, the council rolled out new guidelines for D.C. courts. No banning religious symbols unless they really mess things up. And everyone, judges to clerks, had to do First Amendment training. Linda Martinez stood before the council, laying it out. "The Hargrove mess proves we need clearer rules and better training." A fresh plaque popped up outside the courthouse, etched with "Religious freedom, a right beyond violation." Caroline caught the update on X, where hash crossing court was still buzzing. DC changes laws thanks to Caroline Leavitt. Charles Hargrove, no longer a judge, showed up at the first training session. He stood in front of a bunch of court staff, voice rough but real. I thought I was playing it straight, but I was off. Caroline Leavitt made me see it. Don't let your blind spots take over. The room stayed quiet, a few heads nodding. Mrs. Thompson, now in charge of the court's transparency gig, sat up front scribbling notes. James Wilson, leading training for bailiffs, chimed in. We're the ones watching and listening. If something's off, we've got to call it out. Hargrove looked at them, knowing this was his shot to make things right. A small but solid move. Caroline hung the $500 fine receipt in a glass frame on her White House office wall. It wasn't just a keepsake. It was proof one person could push back. Trump swung by, slapping her shoulder. You're a champ, Caroline. The religious freedom folks are all about you, and I'm right there with them. He let out a big laugh, voice loud. We scored a huge win. Keep it rolling. She nodded, getting ready for her next gig at a conservative event in Virginia, where thousands were pumped to hear the White House's legal star. The ripple from that day stretched past D.C. States like Texas, Florida, and Ohio started eyeballing their own court rules. Texas's governor tweeted, Big thanks to Caroline Leavitt for the religious freedom wake-up call. Texas is on it. Some Florida lawyers pushed for similar training, tagging hash crossing court. On X, folks posted pics of crosses, Islamic badges, or Buddhist bracelets captioned, My freedom, no one's stopping it. Caroline scrolled through, chest swelling. She hadn't seen one courtroom moment sparking all this. The next day, she stood on a Virginia stage facing 5,000 people waving religious freedom banners. That day, I just wanted to do my job, she said, voice ringing through the speakers. But when a judge fined me for my faith, I couldn't sit quiet. This win's not just mine, it's all of ours. The crowd went nuts, clapping loud, some yelling, Caroline for president. She smiled, waving as cameras flashed. That cross on her neck turned into a viral pic online, dubbed by the press as the symbol of grit. Back in D.C., Mrs. Thompson kept tabs on new record-keeping, every fine logged and checked monthly for fairness. James Wilson coached young bailiffs, saying, Don't hold back from speaking up. Leavitt did. We've got to. One night, Caroline got a letter from Linda Martinez. You didn't just flip Hargrove, you flipped the system, thanks. She set it down, glancing at the framed receipt, thinking back on how one random day turned into this wave of change. Trump called at 9 p.m. Caroline, you're my ace, he said. The other side's freaking out and we're coming out on top. Rest up. More tomorrow. She chuckled. Thanks, Mr. President. I'm good to go. And hung up. Sitting there, she touched the cross. Once just a little accessory, now lighting her way, not just for her, but for millions. 3 months later, Caroline stood at the White House podium, cameras going wild. The silver cross on her navy blazer collar shined, a sight millions knew by now. Reporters, TikTokers, and faith group reps leaned in to hear her talk religious freedom. 3 months back, I was just trying to do my job, she started, voice bouncing around. But when a judge fined me for my faith, I stood up. Not just for me, but for you all. Today we've shifted the system. The crowd clapped, some holding hash crossing court signs. Outside the D.C. local court, a new plaque sat in the lobby. Justice honors all faiths. She got a letter from a young law student. Miss Leavitt, I was too scared to push back, but your cross case gave me guts. I'm starting a free clinic for folks hassled over their beliefs. Thank you. Caroline read it by her mirror that night, smiling. She'd sparked the next wave. Charles Hargrove, now a volunteer trainer, stood before a class. I got it wrong once. Leavitt showed me justice doesn't bend for bias. Mrs. Thompson and James Wilson kept the court in check, making sure it stayed straight. Trump called again. Caroline, you're my fighter. Keep it going. She nodded over the phone, feeling a bigger call than ever. Stepping onto the White House balcony, she watched D.C. under the sunset, cross in hand. Not just a memento, but the spark she'd lit, spreading from one courtroom across the country. Freedom's not free, she whispered. It takes people who'll stand up. A message hit her inbox. The Judicial Council wanted her to head a national reform commission. She grinned, ready for what's next. From one off-the-cuff day, she'd reshaped rules, fired up others, and showed one person one belief could shake things up big. The tale, judge finds Caroline Leavitt for her cross, only to find she's a legal whiz, hits on real vibes in today's U.S., especially the tug-of-war between personal rights and big systems. With debates over faith, court fairness, and social media pull everywhere in 2025, her clash with Hargrove echoes how some officials twist the law with their own takes, a thing Americans spot in fights over religious symbols at schools or public spots. Her comeback, leaning on the First Amendment and the Church of Lukumi Babalu I case, proves the Constitution's still a solid guard for freedom even against unfair calls. Crossing Court blowing up on X with Trump's boost shows how social media and big voices can lift one story sky high, a trend all over 2025 America. The takeaway? It's not just about standing up. It's using smarts, people, and tech to shift things. Karoline didn't just talk back to Hargrove. She recorded, pulled law, and rallied from the White House to the streets. In today's world, where power can go sideways, you need proof like her audio, rights know-how, and a crowd behind you. Hargrove, going from blocker to fixer shows, talking and pushing, can flip even the tough ones. Stay steady like Karoline. Framing that fine receipt as a badge proves a small move today can redo the system tomorrow.